for distribution yesterday. So real proud of that. And it's still in film festivals around the country, both recovery film festivals and some gay and lesbian film festivals as well. So really proud of it. So we always start with a little bit of a topic, and one that I realize we haven't done that I think is really important to talk about a little bit is what I call discovering worthiness. I think a lot of times that ability to either have a good sense of self-worth or to not can really impact the quality of life of our recovery. And so I just have a couple steps or things that I think are important in terms of just developing that sense of worthiness for ourselves. And the first one is kind of an obvious one, but it's hard for addicts, and that's to believe you have inherent value. So I've talked before on this webinar about a lot of the core beliefs we carry, some of which are false, like growing up believing I'm unlovable, or that I can't do anything right, or that I'm not safe. All these things that really come from, they're derived from trauma, really, a history of trauma. But they live on in terms of how we see ourselves having value. And so often, especially with sex addiction, and for a good many substance addicts as well, sex becomes a currency by which people think they have value. And this oftentimes stems from sexual abuse. In history, when you were valued for your sex, that was something that made you popular. It got you attention. It got you maybe some loving attention that you didn't get otherwise. So suddenly sex becomes a way that we see ourselves as having value. And certainly we're sexual beings and it is valuable, but I think it's really important to broaden the sense of what we see in terms of our worthiness. The other thing we see in that regard is just unhealthy validation, where people start to seek out validation because they don't feel very good about themselves inside. So they over time create a false self, this kind of paper mache kind of mask, although it's not paper mache, outside that may look, have a great body or a great income or have great clothes or whatever it is, that gets validation from the world. And in others, we look good. We try to look good anyway. But it doesn't match the feeling of not having any value inside. So changing that belief and really believing that we have inherent value. The second one I would say is really embracing challenges. And this again goes to our beliefs, things don't work out for me, or I'm somehow incompetent, I can't do anything right. And these are beliefs I think that a lot of us grow up with, and they really feed our addiction because that starts this victim cycle and in which we feel bad about ourselves. So for me, I think recovery, if I want to embrace challenges, recovery is a great place to be. And recovery has, I think, both small and large challenges, right? So I can have had a little small challenges like asserting myself or doing something that's kind of minorly hard for me or difficult for me, maybe volunteering to chair a meeting or firing responsive or even stuff like that, it can get difficult. But life can also give us major challenges, major health challenges. I had cancer over my years of recovery. I lost a partner to death. My partner died over recovery. So these are big challenges. And whether it's thick or thin or big or small, I realized that my recovery and my program really helped me fuel. So really embracing challenges, not running from them, not fearing that we can't handle it, because you would be amazed at the stuff you can handle if you have a program of recovery underneath you. Know the power, this is the third one, to know the power of the word yet. And remember, this is discovering worthiness. So what do I mean by that? There's two things about that. One, knowing that recovery is a gradual building. I don't have to have everything now. I don't have to have the full Monty of recovery benefits right now. I can develop my skills. I don't have to judge myself and where I am. I have just to be showing up and making progress and doing what I can to take care of myself. And so that ability of yet in a positive sense, I think is really important to know that things will happen. And we have a slogan at Seeking Integrity that we actually write up in the group room. Let's trust the process. And I didn't have a lot of trust in the process before I got into recovery. And I've learned that the process brings me life. Brings me life, whether it's good or challenging or unwelcome or welcome. But the process for me in trusting it is trusting that I can handle it. And that's the real difference and really how I approach my life. So that yet business is important. And I want to just say the flip side of that, because this really helped me get through powerlessness, and embrace powerlessness when I was first in program and recovery. And that I really believe that there were things that would happen to me that hadn't happened yet. And so I remember my first sponsor used this analogy of, every addict is in an elevator going down. And you can get off at the 20th floor, and you can get off at the 10th floor, or the ground floor, and you can go ride it all the way to the basement. But once you believe that elevator is going in that direction, it's up to you to get off as soon as you can. And for me, that was all about the yets that I had a lot of miserable consequences from my addiction, but I came to believe that, yeah, I would have even more bad consequences, and it would just keep happening until I did something different. And so I think that was a real important thing. A couple others. Don't be threatened by the success of others. We go into program, excuse me, and I think sometimes we feel there's this, it's a zero-sum game. If somebody across the room is having a great day, or having a celebration, or wonderful things are breaking in their lives, and in terms of breaking the right way, getting opportunities, good things happen, windfalls, I suddenly feel that, I take that personally somehow. And, it's their success means nothing for me. And it's all about me. And what I've come to understand is that my recovery is not a competition. I'm not competing with anybody except myself. And so it's really important to remember that, and to also employ gratitude, as we've said, I think every webinar this week, is to really be grateful for what I have, what I can do. Positive self-talk goes in this, and employing positive self-talk. We talk about that enough. I don't think I want to say anything more about that. But I do want to mention two others. One is believing that I am enough. And again, this is all to discover worthiness. That was something I could never do. I always needed a lot more to believe that I would be okay. And that manifested in many kind of ways. I kept thinking I need another graduate degree, or I need, I've heard people say, I need to lose 20 pounds. My life will begin, when I have bigger biceps, or have the right clothes, or when I can finally afford this car, and all that stuff that really reminds us that we are not enough, which is part of our disease. And so I think it's really important to know that we are enough as we are right here, and we have everything we need to live a successful and happy life. And I think that's a critical thing to remember too. And that's part of acceptance for me, just accepting where I'm at, seeing what I can work on, but not telling myself a story that somehow until I get X, Y, Z, I can't really be into my life fully. I have to remember that really I'm enough as I am today. And then the final one, before we open it up, believing that I'm worth dignity, respect, and good things. And I want to break that down. And these, again, are belief that I deserve good things from the universe, and that if I do the right thing, they will come. And I really believe that. And this is not magical thinking. Bad stuff happens, good stuff happens, but I think overall, it's certainly true in my life. I have welcomed many more positive things in my life than I ever could have had room for when I was drinking and drugging. So dignity. I just want to say, how many of us experience any kind of dignity in our addiction? Whether it's urinating ourselves, or throwing up in public, or getting locked out, or getting kicked out, or making a scene, or being sloppy, or getting arrested, or whatever it is. Those things are really hard to build dignity in. And so I think embracing dignity in recovery is a really huge part of this worthiness piece. Respect. I never respected myself in my addiction. There was nothing to respect. I would set a boundary or a goal, I'd go through it. I never lived up to what I asked myself to do. I never lived up to promises to myself or others. And I really had virtually no self-respect. And so that really only came about with recovery. So that's been an incredible thing for me. And finally, good things. The statement is, I believe I am worthy of dignity, respect, and good things. And I do believe that good things will happen. And oftentimes I found when good things did come along in my addictive life before I got into recovery, I didn't know how to receive it. I didn't know how to accept it. And chances are they went right on by, whether that was loving friends or supportive partners or all that, comfortable home. None of it was I really ready to accept. So I think just being willing to embrace all those in recovery is really, really important. Do I always get good things? No. But I sure get a lot more than I did. And I'm ready to receive it when it comes my way. So just, there's many other snippets to discover worthiness, but I'll just run through them again really quick. Just believe you have inherent value. Embracing challenges in recovery, not thinking of that as some kind of sign that you're not doing things right. Knowing the power of the word yet. You know, I have yet I've yet to just, I'm perfect the way I am without believing in yets or the yet of things that will happen to me in my addiction if I'm not careful. Feeling threatened by the success of others, positive self-talk, believing I'm enough, and believing I'm worthy of dignity, respect, and good things. So all those I think are really valuable because oftentimes worthiness somehow, in my experience, kind of is so important, but it doesn't get mentioned a lot consciously. And so I just thought it was a good topic tonight. I would love to hear anybody's comments or feedback on that topic or anything you like. We do anything and all things about addiction Q&A here. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Fawcett. Welcome to the people who got here late. As David just recapped, our topic is discovering your self-worth, which I think is a great topic, particularly for addicts new to recovery or new to sobriety, because most of us don't show up with much of that. If you want to ask questions, the easiest way to do it is there's a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Just click that, type your question in, or you can use the chat feature. We've got a small group tonight, so ask away. David, to get us started, right at the beginning, you talked about believing in your inherent value and how most of us have core beliefs that we really don't have any value. We're not worthy of love and respect and dignity and good things. And then you mentioned trauma. I was having I was on the phone with Dr. Rob yesterday when he was on a plane, of course, which is, I don't know, that's when he likes to talk on the phone. And we were talking about, I think it was John Briere who talked about how, particularly for kids, the impact of trauma is dependent on how it's handled within the family. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that affects sort of self-worth in a negative way, and then how to overcome that?
Right. So I think yeah, trauma happens, and trauma doesn't inevitably lead to complications. I think a lot of it can be mitigated. A lot of the negative effects can be mitigated by how the family helps, receives, supports that trauma, acknowledges. I think for a child who may be having, maybe being abused, who tells someone that they don't believe him or her, to have something happen and experience neglect by the parent, just the parents being preoccupied, whether it's through their own addiction or a mental health problem or just working 4 jobs with lots of other kids. I mean, that neglect can really manifest as trauma. So no matter what the experience is, it all depends on the level of support from the family usually, because that's the extent of a child's support system. Sometimes an extended family or a small circle of friends or the parents of friends. But I think if the trauma is acknowledged, if it's talked about, if a child is given a right to their feelings and a way to express it, and remember, kids may not be articulate, but there's a whole specialty in therapy of therapists that work with kids with sand trays and sandboxes and other kinds of nonverbal things that are highly effective. If there are ways, if the family can help the child through it, I think it doesn't have to be problematic, or certainly not devastating. It's when it's ignored, it's when it's minimized, when it's rationalized away, that's when the child starts to have these core beliefs that, I'm crazy, or I'm unsafe, or nobody loves me, or I'm not important. Whatever those core beliefs are, they start to take root. And I think that's where that's where the long-term damage of trauma can happen, where it's just uh, not handled in a very effective way. And the trauma, of course, manifests not only as post-traumatic stress or later on in life, but it can complicate. It can have physical signs and symptoms. Well, trauma can be held in the body. So people can have all kinds of physical symptoms and ailments, and there's this strong body-mind connection, body-mind connection that we're trying to understand and get a better handle on. So I think all those things are important. But if we can just recognize, give a voice, and give support, and sometimes just be there, I think that really can mitigate the effects of some of those childhood traumatic experiences.
Yeah, as a kid, my mother was inappropriate at times, and when I complained, it would be minimized, and at times I would even be laughed at and told I was being too sensitive, and the blame was shifted onto me. And as a little kid, what do you do with that? And I carried that with me well into adulthood, into my recovery, when I finally had a therapist to explain that that was abuse, and it should have been dealt with, and it wasn't. And but those wounds are still there. They never really heal, I think. They just lose a little power, maybe, with work. So we have a question.
With those really old ones, the best we can get is to not have the feelings reactivated every time a similar situation is triggered or the memory of it has occurred. The intensity of the feeling lessens. And that's progress.
Yeah, and it's just peeling back layers of the onion, and it makes me cry every time I peel back a layer. But that's life. We have a question here. Interesting question here. How is sex validating for a sex addict, given the cycle of shame that goes along with it?
So that's a great question. And because when someone is in that cycle of shame, and when someone's acting out behavior has progressed to the point where it's really problematic, it's probably not extremely validating or very validating at all. Where I see it happening, I see a lot of clients who are very sexualized, and this often stems from early childhood activity, whether it's abuse or voluntary, and that a child starts to see their worth in sexual terms. And it's really hard to overcome that as an adult, and that often leads to sex addiction. So someone may feel loved, they may feel they're getting attention. I've had clients who would say they only really felt alive if they were being pursued, or if they were kind of on the hunt for someone and got them. And then they lose interest. But I think there's this validation of who I am. And one problem I see, and particularly in the gay community, and I think I suspect also with women or any individuals that criticize their looks and how they look and their sexual persona as they age, it's a real crisis. I work with a lot of gay men and who are, have been these kind of gorgeous men and got a lot of attention and a lot of worthiness based on that in their 20s and their 30s and even their 40s and 50s. But now they're noticing that people aren't looking at them as much. They feel kind of invisible in the street. They're not getting the attention. And they're in a real crisis because they don't know how else to validate themselves besides their sexual being. And so I think to really take a look at one's own system for how we validate ourselves and really make sure that it's not dependent certainly on any one thing, but especially not dependent on our sex appeal and our sexual activities and our sexual prowess. And this question is absolutely correct, because when it kind of crosses the line and all starts to fall apart, it doesn't feel very validating. And I think at that point, what used to be validating, what used to be exciting, but the intensity suddenly becomes shameful. It becomes hollow and empty. I've had clients who, had sex with 1,000 people, looking for connection, looking to just feel loved and accepted, and they walked away from 1,000 of those connections feeling kind of empty and hollow. So once it turns, it does certainly doesn't work anymore, and that can be a crisis for someone who's been dependent on that mode of self-worth.
Yeah, my experience as a recovering sex addict is that it stopped working long before I even thought about getting sober. I would feel triggered. Most of my triggers are emotional, depressed, lonely, ashamed. And I would want to do something about it. And what I knew to do was to pursue sex as a way to sort of get out of my head and only be focused on one very intense, exciting thing. And then, there was a lot of ritualization involved with that. And then I would get to the point where I would act out. There would be the orgasm, and suddenly I was thrown back into my feelings. And, the cycle would do a little loop with the shame loop, and then it would go back to the sex addiction cycle. And, I'd have some denial, and then I'd be triggered, and then start again. And, so sometimes it was a figure eight, sometimes it was just a loop. But the shame grew and grew and grew as the behavior got worse and worse and worse. And then once I got into recovery and realized how problematic it was, I spent a couple of years slipping and sliding, and the shame really kicked in then. So it was pretty awful. But there was the initial driver for my addiction was that sex gave me worth. Sex gave me validation from other people. It was external validation. If somebody wants me in that way, I must be worth it. And David talked about, victims and hunters. I don't think he used that, language, but, I was never the victim. I was the hunter. And I would take somebody down for the kill, and then I didn't want to eat because that had nothing to do with it. What I wanted out of that was to be validated enough that somebody would want me. Once they wanted me, I was done. I got what I wanted. It wasn't about the sex. My disease was never about sex. It was about shame and validation. That's a great question. Another question here. How does exposure to porn at a young age affect the child's self-worth? Does it affect how he or she validates himself or herself?
That's a great question. We are getting more and more research about the effects of porn at earlier ages. One of the things that I've seen is that really it affects how a child thinks they should look and act and be, and how sex looks and acts and should be, and how their partners should be and look. So I think it really kind of distorts the expectation of sex for everybody, and it's really damaging. We have a generation now of young men, particularly, who have been raised on pornography, and many of whom are struggling to have a relationship with a real human being. They may be virgins, but they have a whole lot of virtual lives caught up in porn. I've seen it really distort. I have young men I work with who just their body image is so messed up from pornography. And we've known this about young women as well, how these expectations really distort what people think they should look like. There's a great study that was done, doesn't sound highly scientific, but it was really informative, looking at G.I. Joe dolls. This is for men, male body image. And they looked at the original G.I. Joe, which was, 30 years ago, and they did sort of how it would translate into real life body proportions and sizes. And it was relatively accurate. But the doll, over time, the current G.I. Joe, if you were to translate it in human terms, it's like 30-inch biceps and it's impossibly, ridiculous measurements that nobody can achieve. And so I think it's just confusing. And pornography is really the vehicle by which all of these messages about the opposite sex or the sexual partner or oneself, how sex should be and how it should look, And without the awkward moments and the messy moments and the confusion and the uncertainty, whatever else goes with sex, it's all part of the process. So I think that exposure to porn can be quite devastating and really contribute to the inability of young boys and girls really to validate themselves in healthy ways. They start to think, oh my God, this is how it should be. And they don't feel that way and they don't look that way, and it's a real problem. So I think porn has all kinds of problematic issues, but particularly with kids, body image, self-worth, validation, all of that can be very confusing for a kid and quite harmful, I think, in the long run. And I don't know that we have any kind of cultural counterbalance to that right now, because we don't really talk about body image or how men should be and act and what masculinity is or femininity. We don't have those open discussions as much as we should. I think that would be a great counterbalance to some of the harmful, negative kind of influences of porn, another kind of media exposure of sex and sexual activity.
Yeah, I think it's important to also mention that porn today that kids access, it looks nothing like porn of the pre-internet era when I was a kid and when David was a kid. Maybe somebody had like a Hustler magazine or some, a Playboy or something, and you get a look at it, or you find something in the trash, or and you were so lucky, and and all your friends need to look at it and ooh and ah, or it's completely different now. There's so much. It's you really had to work to find porn when I was a kid. All you have to do is type in porn on a search engine, and these sites don't even ask if you're 18 anymore. You don't have to pay for anything. There were no barriers. A 6-year-old kid can type in boobs, pardon my language, and get it, and get lots of it, an endless stream of it. And one of the things that we see happening, and maybe David can address this a little bit, is we escalate our use. Things that initially are very exciting to us lose the excitement factor, and things ramp up, and that's where we get these kids who are they're watching rape videos and bestiality videos, and they think this is normal, and they don't know how to do something that would be intimate and connected. Maybe David, can you talk a little bit about the escalation process?
Yeah, I sure can, because I think it's really disturbing for people to think of kids looking at those kind of films. And it's just disturbing because that happens with adults as well. And I think it all has to do with dopamine, this neurotransmitter in the brain that really is responsible for desire and wanting. And porn, sexual acting out, stimulant drugs, particularly chemsex, all the things we treat as seeking integrity, all these intensity addictions that really work on dopamine, this ability to really stoke up desire on the part of dopamine. The problem with dopamine is that things very quickly develop tolerance, which means that what was exciting for me today, after a few times, is not going to be so exciting anymore. And so I start to look for new images, and that's why you get these pornography addicts who have thousands of images. They're always into something different, saving them, rarely going back to them, but looking for new. And there's this progression. The same thing happens with chemsex, where things that were exciting, and maybe if I'm a meth addict, maybe going to a bookstore was really exciting, but then maybe after that doesn't do it anymore. I need the intensity, so I need something with more risk or taboo. So maybe I start going to public parks or picking up really dangerous guys, getting into rougher scenes, more taboo things, and all this kind of escalates over time in an effort to get that feeling that quickly starts to evade us. And so we start to escalate, and people move from smoking to injecting, or from a certain kind of acting out to others. And we got into this conversation with porn. If you just think about pornography, when Scott and I were younger, older than Scott, but not only was it hard to get, but it was really what we would say I think today, very vanilla. That was pretty much the extent of porn. And I think as a society, we've gotten used to more and more outrageous pornography. Just because as a society, we have become kind of accustomed to some of the violence and some of the images, and the standard porn of these days, I think, is much different animal than it was 20 years ago, just because society is involved in not in a good direction. I think it changes this tolerance for these images. And it's why you see people getting into such trouble, people who never thought of themselves as had any interest in pedophilia, for example, or ephebophilia, which is also attracted to younger people. But this need for excitement kind of leads them down this path, usually through pornography, of discovering new images. We know from science that oftentimes people that have that discovery process of new, kind of more taboo, more outrageous, sometimes illegal images, they rarely cross over and act out on that. But still, it can be dangerous both legally and dangerous to someone's self-esteem and self-worth and their recovery. So this is a problem, and tolerance is something we see particularly in these three addictions: sex addiction, porn addiction, and chemsex, because they all involve intensity. And intensity quickly needs something more to get us to the same spot. I'm blabbering on about this a lot, but one more thing. I think I've had many clients who were methamphetamine or cocaine clients say that first time they used the drug was just this incredible experience. And almost every time after that, they were trying to recapture that first time and never quite could do it again. And I've actually heard the same about heroin. So very quickly we develop this tolerance, and kind of the experience that we're seeking is almost impossible. And looking for it can really lead us down the wrong path.
David, are there certain personality types that crave intensity? The people who they work on Wall Street, or they're ER doctors, or trial lawyers, things like that. Are these people more likely to get involved with, say, cocaine and porn, or cocaine and prostitutes, or things like that, or does it hit everybody the same?
No, I think there are some differences. We see some personality types, sometimes some personality disorders at play. Narcissists are a common one. For one, more rarely, sociopathic, but antisocial. But more often, it's narcissist, really self-centered. So kind of the world of revolving around someone. But there's this pattern of behavior that we do see among certain people that just need that intensity, and they tend to find careers, as you mentioned, Scott, as ER surgeons or ER docs or pilots, or they have hobbies like rock climbing or bungee jumping or parachuting, or that need for intensity, and they have a real intolerance for boredom or stillness. And this is one of the big challenges of those folks, and that's most of whom we treat, by the way, with these addictions. There's a real intolerance for boredom, stillness, which is, of course, an essential skill for recovery, in my mind. You have to really be able to tolerate sitting still and feeling and listening inside. And so, yeah, there's this personality, and they need excitement. So one of the things I recommend in recovery is to kind of meet that need, because boredom for these guys and women is a huge relapse risk. And so to really, first of all, to build your tolerance for boredom, but at some point they're going to need to get out and do something. So yeah, go out and exercise, run, get in some kind of competition with yourself, running a half marathon or a marathon, or do some rock climbing or parachuting. I've had a lot of, actually here at the Crystal Meth Anonymous group, they sometimes go out as a group and do parachute jumps. And it feeds that need, and in a healthy, kind of less destructive way. So I think, and that is kind of a core personality type. So I think that may not change so much, but I think they need to find ways to adapt, to live healthy lives in recovery and still accommodate that need for intensity.
So these like at our Seeking Integrity Los Angeles facility, we see a lot of very sort of high achieving high stress guys. So they shouldn't be walking away from their rock climbing hobby just because it may trigger the same intensity or a version of the same intensity. If that's their personality, they may need it as part of their recovery.
I think they really have to understand what that's all about and really look at their activities in recovery as ways to enjoy and have pleasure and accommodate that streak for excitement. And so I think the danger there is that it's very easy, even in recovery, if I start really or intensity all the time, it's easy to miss my feelings and miss recovery, and that can be as much a distraction, if not an addiction, as other kinds of things like methamphetamine. So there's a little bit of risk there, but I think guys that sort of find healthy ways to do that with balance do better.
And particularly if they're doing those activities with a group, in particular a recovery group, because the CMA guys here, they also go skydiving here. It must be a CMA thing. Let's go jump out of a plane.
Right.
CMA is Crystal Meth Anonymous, for those who don't know.
And that's a great point, because one of the things that intensity junkies often do is do things in a solitary way. And so I think just by the nature of doing it as a group is a really step forward, and really it becomes a healing process. Whether it's rock climbing or parachuting or whatever it is. I think it just has to be done in balance. You don't want to dive into that and make that your life, but I think to recognize that as a healthy outlet, one of those outer circle kind of behaviors can be a good thing. And a group activity by far is the most powerful.
Okay, everybody, just a reminder, our topic today is self-worth or discovering worthiness. You can ask questions on that or anything else. Type them into the Q&A feature, and David will answer them for you. While we wait for that, because we're out of questions, type some questions in, people. I hear in meetings, David, sometimes people say, if you're struggling with self-esteem, behave in esteemable ways, and you'll develop some self-esteem. Would you agree with that? Not agree? And can you elaborate a little bit on how you view that?
Yeah, so I think in my experience, a lot of the recovery was that slogan, act as if, right? And to start changing behavior before we maybe necessarily understand it. And this was one of my, I guess, denial systems was to really rationalize everything. And a defense system, I guess it would be, I really needed to understand things. I needed to understand my addiction. I felt if I understood what was going on, I would be able to control it. And in recovery, I realized even if I did figure it out with a possible task, it wouldn't necessarily translate into behavior change. And so I had to kind of reverse that equation and say, well, if I start acting differently in esteemable ways, things that may garner me self-worth and esteem from others and myself, if I just start doing those things, oftentimes both the understanding followed, but certainly there was a change, not only in how I felt about myself, but in terms of how other people saw me and received me. And so I think that's absolutely true in my experience, is to really start living a life with the values that program sets out. And that one of those is in our corporate name, integrity, just to live with integrity, to follow through. And this is not a mysterious concept. And, if I say something, if I'm true to my word, if I say I'll show up, I show up. If I say I'll make coffee at a meeting, I make coffee at a meeting. If I say I'm going to be at this webinar at 8, I'll be at the webinar at 8 or 5 to 7. So yeah, it's doing things that that show that I have integrity. And I think the more I can do of that, even if it doesn't feel natural, and I needed some guidance from my sponsor early on, because nothing felt normal or natural, but to try certain things. And after a while, it got more comfortable, and I rapidly started to feel myself being received in a different way. But more important, I really felt internally that something was changing. And there was a whole system that was kind of being torn down and rebuilt within in terms of how I viewed myself and my self-worth. So yeah, I do believe in that totally.
Yeah, somebody told me early on in recovery, picture who you want to be and behave like that person. And eventually it'll sink in. I didn't think I was a good person, but as I behaved like the good person that I wanted to be, my self-worth rose a little bit. So we've got some questions here. Thank you, guys. I've heard others from 12-step programs how affirmations have improved their self-esteem. However, when I state those affirmations to myself, they seem artificial. And then there's a follow-up to that. Is there a proper way of doing affirmations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is right on the target of what we're talking about with self-worth and discovering worthiness and developing worthiness. As we've mentioned on this webinar before, one of the most powerful ways, in my opinion, to change how we view ourselves is by the practice of affirmations. And affirmation is simply an affirmative statement, and it's an I statement. It's in the present tense, so I am, and a trait or feature, a strong person. I am worthy of love. And it basically, once we start to understand what those negative core beliefs we had, and I mentioned a few early on, I can't do anything right, I'm unlovable, I'm confident, whatever, I'm unsafe, no one cares about me, whatever those statements are, the affirmations are an opportunity to kind of reprogram the wiring that we have, the software that's operating and kind of creating our thoughts and moods. And so there's a couple steps required. One is to really unearth the negative core beliefs. What is it that we need to change? And then to really consciously sit down, and I believe in writing them out because they take some construction, and then they take practice. And I totally understand what this person is saying, because at first when you start affirmations, they do seem artificial. They don't seem believable because you don't believe that about yourself. And I think sometimes we first believe it, other people can see it in us before we can see it in ourselves. But over time, if we do practice those affirmations, I think they really make a tremendous difference. And they do have tremendous power. And I've joked before in this show, this webinar, about Stuart Smalley and Saturday Night Live, and putting affirmations, making them a laughing stock for a whole generation. But they do work. And I think a couple of techniques I use is I write them down, and they should be short and sweet. I put them on a Post-it note, and I put them somewhere where I'll see it, where I'll glance at, maybe on the mirror, or maybe on the edge of my computer screen, or just somewhere where I kind of see it during the day, and I let it wash over me and consciously kind of say it. And there's been a lot of research on changing habits, and sometimes we can change habits in as quickly as 3 weeks. So it's just with regular repetition, repeating, we start to believe it. That sense of being artificial does fade. So I'd really encourage you to keep trying it. Make sure your affirmations fit and they reflect where you want to be, and go for it.
Yeah, there's a follow-up to the question of that, but in really practical terms, how do you do affirmations, which David talked about a little. I'll add to that. There's power in repetition. If I'm working on a character defect, like honesty, or lack thereof would be the character defect, I will create an affirmation or 2 or 3 about honesty, and it's not I will work to become an honest person, or I am working to become an honest person. I always phrase them as if it's already happened. I am an honest person. I feel good when I am honest with those around me. And I'll do those affirmations for usually at least 30 days. It takes a while to sink in. So David hit it, repetition, and I do them as part of my morning routine every day. I'm working on this week, this month, this year. this century for some of the character defects. I consciously do them as part of my morning prayer and meditation. And I do them for at least a month before I really start to notice any change in how I'm thinking and behaving. So,
one of the note about affirmations, in constructing them, you don't want to use a negative, so you don't want to use the word not. So I don't want to be selfish, because that you really wanted to construct it with a positive framework. I want to be generous, and you want to focus on not selfish, because if you repeat that, even though the word not is in there, your focus is on selfishness, but you want to really construct it so it's on something that's positive.
Yeah, with mine, I would even go a little bit further. I am generous. Again, act as if it's already happened.
Yeah, thank you. That's
talked about a couple times today. Act as if, and the thinking will catch up with the behavior. So, now we got another question here, David. I was raised a Christian, so theologically, I believe that I have infinite value. However, my heart can't seem to believe that. I have a hard time believing any human can really have unconditional love. How can an addict really internalize a healthy sense of love and self-acceptance?
Wow, great question. So I think you're talking about a phenomenon I see often where there's kind of layers of this. We're told how it should be. We may have a theological acceptance or spiritual acceptance of something, but at some point there's a disconnect between that and how we feel about ourselves inside. And that really then makes it hard to really, you can follow your faith sometimes, but there's a lot of self-doubt, a lot of self-loathing, a lot of judgment. To me, the process for that, and you say, can any human really have unconditional love? I don't know. If I have a Labrador who has unconditional love. I don't know that ever could be my lab, but I think we can make progress. And I think the difference for me is being able to work the steps or whatever healing process I have to kind of heal all those inconsistencies that interrupt that flow of belief from that theological center that I'm worthy of love, I'm unconditionally loved, into whatever interruptions, self-beliefs, little hiccups interfere with that really getting into my heart and my soul and working from the inside. And I think for me, that was correcting some of those things, my beliefs about myself, that I was a bad person or that I was lost or doomed, whatever those beliefs were, not worthy of love. And I think if you're an addict, just addictive behavior gives you plenty of ammunition for those kind of thoughts, because we do things that are not honorable and not worthy of love and respect. And so how can we not have a disconnect? So I think for me, at least, the healing came in working through those things, starting to live a life of integrity, starting to love myself unconditionally. And that doesn't mean giving up responsibility for things I do, doesn't mean that I don't make amends or I've done something wrong, but really, really believing that I'm a really good person and believing that, and a lovable person and someone who can love in return. And is it always unconditional? Probably not, but boy, is it progress for me, because I was kind of given this worldview in my own religious upbringing that this is how it should be, this is what I kind of internalized the messaging and the thoughts, but it never resonated with me, never felt true. And only after I did my own recovery and have been working on it for years now, does it seem to bring more truth in me. And I can really start to make sense of it. So I would just encourage you to stay on the path of recovery and really work on any little bits that you still have internalized where you don't quite believe in yourself or consider yourself worthy of love and self-esteem.
We hear in, particularly in 12-step meetings a lot, progress, not perfection. I think this is an area where that really applies. Self-love, self-worth, unconditional love for self and for others is progress, not perfection. We don't get into recovery because we've got our shit together. There's a Christian sex addiction therapist, I believe she's in Atlanta, named Jenna Riemersma. And God, I wish we had her on tonight because this is right up her alley. She's working on a book. I got a sneak peek at it. I read some of it while I was on vacation over the weekend, and God, she's talking about exactly this from a Christian perspective, and she's talked about how Jesus had unconditional love, and we're just teaching ourselves to love the same way that he did. Now, I'm not a Christian, religious, anything, but it really made sense the way she explained it, and I'm not doing it justice, but she really equated the principles of Christianity with the principles of recovery and coming to generate self-worth and unconditional love, or at least love for self and others. And she's very, very grounded and realistic, in the process. She gets it. And it was such a privilege to read that, and I can't show it around until it comes out, which will probably be later this year. But yeah,
that sounds like an amazing book. I
God,
wanted to add one thing that we haven't really talked about, that, and that's the role of shame, right? Because I think we can really, shame is present in every addiction, but I think oftentimes it gets compounded with religion, where we have these ideals set out for us, and we know on the inside that it clearly doesn't match what the expectation is. And I think that shame really sets up this almost a barrier to being able to make the two compatible. So I'd really encourage you to look at shame too. And I'll just give you an example. I work with a lot of gay men, many of whom were raised with very religious backgrounds, and who really were very religious themselves and highly spiritual, but incredibly conflicted, because all the messaging was that everything about them was wrong. And so they internalized a lot of that, but there was this, in recovery, this task or this challenge of really starting to integrate the two and really believe themselves that they are lovable just the way they are. And that's something I think we all need to aspire to. And I totally agree with Scott. It's progress, not perfection. We will never be my Labrador, but we can make good progress.
Yeah. So, well, thank you, everybody. We are pretty well out of time. Dave, is there anything you want to add before we log out tonight?
No, except just I think this idea of discovering worthiness is something, at least in my own recovery, I try to keep operating all the time in the background, just to notice if I'm shortchanging myself, or noticing when I'm doing a good job, and be aware of it. It's like I have a worthiness meter that's kind of always operating. That I think it's good to keep track of, because if it starts to dip, that for me, that's a slippery slope. I need to really be alert to that and take care of it when that starts to happen. It's an early indicator for me of trouble.
Yeah, we just had one of the attendees put in a link to some information on affirmation. So if you check the chat feature real quick, I'll give everybody a few seconds to just click it if you're interested, and you can go check that out before we log off. So thank you, David, so much. I love the background, even though we couldn't see your book with your background.
I'll figure that out for next time.
Yeah. So we'll be back next Wednesday, same time, same place, 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. And we hope to see you there. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Everyone, good night.